Okay, so now that we have our shoulder controls in place and we've got the twist angle being calculated and generated on our spine, it's time to start looking at matching our attached shoulder control to the detached shoulder control and vice versa. Now, as mentioned back in Character Rigging 1, we're going to be using a workaround here that involves editable objects where we have another node that acts just like our shoulder control. It has the exact same space as our shoulder control, which means it's not going to have a pre-transform since our shoulder controls don't have a pre-transform, and it will be parented underneath the parent of the shoulder control. So it's going to exist in the exact same space as that shoulder control, only it will be invisible and not selectable, so the animator never knows it's there. And we're going to specify that when we have our character asset as an editable node, and that means that we can make any changes that we like to it down inside a locked asset and we won't get permission errors. From there, once we've applied certain functionality onto that node, we know because our actual control exists in the same space, we can copy transformation parameters over to that control object. And since we know certain transformation parameters have been promoted up to our asset, we can manually set those using a method that makes sure that we get reference parameters if we're setting those, and we won't get any permission errors. So we are going to be using that same workaround. For a more in-depth explanation of why we needed to use that, do refer back to Character Rigging 1. So the first thing I want to do is create some buttons on our asset and also create some parameters where we can specify the actual control objects and their editable versions as well. From there we can get all of those set up and have specified on the asset, and then turn around and actually start creating the script. Now the scripting process is going to be two parts. This first part is going to deal with matching these shoulder controls themselves, but we're going to see that we are going to have a problem when it comes to our twist angle and our control RX angle, and I'll show why and explain why when we get to the end of this video. Then in the next video we'll actually look at fixing that problem. So let's start out by creating buttons on our shoulder dynamic control parenting asset. So I'm going to bring up the type properties for that asset, jump over to the parameters tab, and I'm going to create two new buttons inside our dynamic control parenting folder. The first is going to be match attach to detach, and the second is going to be match detach to attach. So the first button, when we click it, the purpose is to take our attached control, the control that's parented to our hips, and make it match both position and orientation of that detached control, the control that's parented to our master control. The functionality for the second button needs to do the opposite of that, take that detached control and make sure that it matches the position and orientation of our attached control. To do that, we need to reference some nodes. We're going to need to reference the controls themselves and their editable versions. So I'm going to create 4 operator paths. Let's drag out 4 operator paths. The first is going to be the attach object, and that's going to be null only, so object null only. The second is going to be the editable attach object, so editable attach object, and again editable attach object. This is going to be object null only. The next will be our detach object, and again this will be object null only. And then finally we're going to have our editable detach object, so editable detach object. And finally that 2 is going to be an object null only. So with those in place, let's accept that. Now we already have the attach and detach objects that we can specify. So for our attach object, let's bring that over here. We want to grab our shoulder control, hip control parent, exporting a relative path. And for the detach object, I want the shoulder control, master control parent, exporting a relative path. Now the editable versions we haven't yet created, but we're going to create nulls that are parented up underneath the parents of our existing controls, and since our controls again do not have a pre-transform, if we simply create default nulls with no pre-transform as children of those nodes, they will exist in the exact same space. So I'm going to branch off of the shoulder hip control parent initial position null into a brand new null, which I will rename to shoulder control underscore hip control parent underscore editable. and we just want to turn off visibility and selectability again, because if we select an editable node inside a locked asset, we get jumped down inside the asset. That's why we can't simply specify the control itself as an editable node. We don't want to get thrown down inside our asset when the animator is working with that control object, so we have another node act as that editable node. Then when they select the control object, they're selecting a normal node, a non-editable node. They don't get thrown down inside. They'll never be able to select that editable node because of the fact that it's hidden from the animator. So I want to do the same for the master control parent. So I'm going to branch off of the master control parent initial position null into a new null, which I'm going to name shoulder control underscore master control parent underscore editable. And again, this needs to be turned off in terms of visibility and selectability. Again, later when we create our asset, we'll make sure that both of these are specified as editable nodes. Right now we don't actually have an asset containing all of this, so there's nowhere to need to specify those as editable nodes. We just know based on what we saw back in character rigging 1 that we are going to need to use this workaround, as we saw with our IK handle down inside that super wrist control asset. So we've got our new editable detach and attach objects that we can specify. So I'm going to specify these on our node. So our editable hip control parent for the shoulder control is our editable attach, and then the editable master control parent for our shoulder control is the editable detach. So now that we've got those specified, I can bring up the type properties for our asset, and I can start writing the beginnings of our match attach to detach and match detach to attach functions. Again, we are going to have a problem with our twist and our rotate X, and I'll demonstrate that after we've written these scripts, and then in the next video that's going to be the focus of that video in terms of fixing that problem. So I'm going to bring up the type properties, jump over to the scripts tab. We do want to create a Python module event handler to contain this script. And let's start out by writing our match attach to detach. So I'm going to define match attach to detach. And we want to go ahead and basically grab in 3 nodes. We need to know about our attach object, our detach object, and also the editable attach. So we can say make sure the editable attach is equal in terms of position and orientation to the detach, then copy over transformation parameters to our attach. From there we're simply going to go ahead and actually get that in place where we make the editable attach equal to the detach and copy over parameters. So I'm not going to really worry about commenting out this part of the script. It's such a very short script, it's very simple to see what's going on. So our attach object is equal to who.pwd, that's us, .node, that's a node relative to us, who.pwd.evalPalm, and we want to eval that attach object parameter we created. So it's going to take that parameter, it's going to evaluate it, that will return a path, a relative or absolute path to a node. If it's relative to our asset. If we then call on who.pwd.node, we're saying we could have an absolute reference. If we have a relative reference, it's relative to this particular node. Those references obviously will link up since the parameter and the fact that we're calling on .node are from the same node. They're going to link up, and that will return to us that attach object as a node reference. So I want to do the same for our editable attach. So editable attach object equals who.pwd.node, who.pwd.evalPalm, editable attach object. And finally, the detach object equals who.pwd.node, who.pwd.evalPalm, detach object. Fantastic. So from there, what we're going to do, we want to match our attach control to the detach control. So let's say match attach control to detach control. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that our editable attach object has its world transform set to the world transform of the detach object. This is a very powerful function because the set world transform function will take into account a pre-transform if we have one, in this case we don't, and any parenting, and given a world transformation matrix specifying position and orientation in world space, it will make sure, based on our parenting and everything, to calculate the local transforms needed to give it that world transformation. It's an incredibly powerful Python function that comes with the Houdini object model. So we're going to say editable attach object.set world transform, and we need to pass it in a transformation matrix, and we want to basically get the world transformation matrix for our detach object, so the world space position and orientation of that detached object. So we're going to say detach object dot world transform to transform. That's going to give us the world transform, which is then going to pass to that set world transform method call. Once we've done that, that's going to now mean our editable attach object has matched our detach object, but we need to go ahead and copy parameters from that over to the actual attach object. We need to copy the translation and rotation parameters. So we're going to say attach object.palm tx.get reference palm, because if we are promoting this parameter up to an asset, just saying .set or set pending on a parameter that has been promoted up to a locked asset is going to throw a permission error in the current build of Houdini. In order to get this to work without permission errors, we need to get the reference parameter, which, if we are referencing a parameter, will return the top level of that reference. So say we were referencing a parameter and that parameter was referencing someone else, it would find whoever that top level was. Or if we were not referencing another parameter, this will simply return ourselves. So either way, we're going to have a parameter that we can set. And we're going to say set pending, since I don't want to cause any keyframes unless we have auto key on. I only want to cause changes in values that the animator has to confirm themselves. I'm going to change this and set this to the editable attach object, and we want to evaluate the translate x parameter of that object. So we can see we're taking the attach objects translate x and setting it to the editable attach objects translate x. I can copy that entire line with Control C, paste that once and twice, changing this for translate z and y, both the value from the editable attach that we're referencing and the parameter we're setting. I'm then going to copy all three of these lines. So highlight these, Control C, Control V to paste them, and change these out for rotate X, Y, and Z. Again, both the parameters that we're getting the values of and the parameters that we're setting. So with that, that is going to wrap up our match attach to detach without worrying, of course, about our twist or that rotate X for our controls. So let's jump over and find our match attach to detach button, set that over to a Python callback script, and call who.pwd .hda module, that's that Python event handler we just created, .match attach to detach, which is the function that we just defined. If we accept that, given that there weren't any syntax errors, that now means that if we were to move our detach control, so let's blend over to detach, and let's move our detach control, and rotate our detach control. And then let's move our hips as well. Let's rotate our hips so we know that our hips aren't going to align with the, in terms of the attach control, isn't going to sit in the same space as our detach control, which means we're not simply copying parameters from one of these guys to the other, but we do want to make sure that our attach control matches that detach, so we can say match attach to detach. If that functioned correctly, now when we blend back over, really interesting point here. It has matched the position. Notice the rotations. That's something that I actually forgot to set a second ago. What did we do when we came in and we created those control objects? We changed their rotation order. When we created those editable versions, we didn't change their rotation order. That means that we're setting rotations on the editable versions for their rotation order, and obviously their rotation order being different from our control objects. When you copy the rotations over, that's now a different end result. So we do need to come in and for both of those editable attach and editable detach objects, set their rotation order also to rotate Y, rotate X, and rotate Z. So rotate Y, rotate X, rotate Z. If we now come in and say match attach to detach, they're both going to exist in the same space. You will notice that we do have issues with the twisting on those controls, and again we were going to talk about that shortly, but those controls themselves exist in the exact same space. We can take a look. There's the orientation for our attach control, there's the orientation for our detach control. They exist in the exact same space. So the issues we're seeing with our twist we're going to deal with, and that's just a very minor issue with the twist. We're actually going to have more major issues that I can demonstrate shortly. But let's reset our control objects back down to their initial rotations and orientations and positions as well. So that's our attach. Let's also grab our detach and zero him out in rotation, zero him out in position. So they're all back to their default location. We can now repeat this process for the match detach to attach script. So I'm going to bring up the type properties again. I'm simply going to copy the script that we've got so far, Control C, and then I'm going to jump down to the bottom and paste this, changing this now to match detach to attach. We do still need the attach object since we want to get its transformation parameters. We still need the detach object, but we need to work now with the editable detach object. So obviously I want to evaluate the editable detach object parameter. And now we're dealing with setting the editable detach object. So editable detach object, and we want to set its world transform now to the attach object. And then we're going to come in and set the detach object's parameters to match the editable detach object's parameters. So I'm only going to write that out the once for that line, delete out everything else. We can then go ahead and copy that line, paste that twice over, change that out for translate Y and Z. Then go ahead and copy all three of those lines, Control C. Paste that again and change this out now for rotate X, Y, and Z. So let's change that out for rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z, and also the parameters we're referencing. I will go ahead and delete that line that's in between those. Fantastic, so we can now call on our match detach to attach on the button that we created. So match detach to attach, we want a Python callback script language. Who.pwd, that's us.hda module, that's that Python event handler we created, .match detach to attach. If we accept that, we can now go ahead and let's move our attach object. So I'm going to slide this on up, rotate this on over, let's give it some crazy orientation. Then let's even go as far as grabbing our hips and giving those a crazy orientation. We could even go as far as giving them a crazy position as well. So we've got a combination of the hips and the attach control giving us the desired location. If we were to currently blend over to the detach control, we can see that we're back to that default location. We haven't been affected by either of those transformations we just made since we're detached from the hips and obviously completely unassociated with the attach control. So let's say match detach to attach, and we've got an issue that's just been thrown here. We do have on line 19, we have an issue where we're evaluating a parameter. I believe that's probably our name for the editable detach object. That's probably that line that's referencing that new parameter. So let's take a look. We're on line 19 where we have the problem. Indeed, editable detach object, editable detach object. And for some reason it doesn't want to evaluate the parameter editable detach object. So I think I've actually spelt that differently. Let's take a look at how I spelt that over here. Editable detach. See, here I wrote it as editable detach object in full. Here I only have obj. I'm going to go ahead and change that on the parameter to match with our other parameter names. So now if we accept that, go ahead and run this again. So currently we are still unattached. Match detach to attach. And none type object has, and yes, because now we've changed that parameter, we've lost the reference to that node, so we do need to go ahead and make that reference again. So that's the master control parent editable for our shoulder control. Okay, third time lucky, match detach to attach. Fantastic. So yes, we do have issues again with our twist, and that is causing issues there, but if we take a look, as Houdini comes back to life, there we go. Take a look at, there is the orientation for our attach control. There is the orientation for our detach control. Both position and orientation is identical. So that is working fantastically. Again, we're seeing issues with the twist. Now, talking with issues with the twist, the easiest way to demonstrate the issues that we're getting there is to take a look at what happens if we give ourselves a 360-degree rotation. So let me just zero these back out. So we were talking earlier about why we couldn't just use the origin expression to reference for our twist angle. When we were just talking on the whiteboard about that twist angle, we said that because we need to go round and through 360 degrees, more than 360 degrees, and keep continuing, we couldn't just use the origin expression, because the origin expression would give us the smallest angle, positive or negative, that it can find to get from one object to the other. So that's a problem that we're getting because of the fact that when we match our controls, that's exactly what we're doing. We're effectively using the origin expression in that set world transform. We're finding the shortest rotation, the smallest rotation we need to set in order to set ourselves over to that particular orientation, because we're only concerned with the orientation and not how many times have we rotated through Y to get to that orientation. So you can see that I've rotated through Y a number of times here, and that's given us a very interesting set of twist angle affecting those three controls. If I go ahead and match the detach to the attach, in terms of orientation we're going to be the same, but notice what happens to those controls. We completely lose all of those cycles of twist that we applied, and we snap right back round. The orientation of those controls is the same. If we switch between them, orientation wise they're the same, but twist angle wise they're different. So we're going to need to fix the issue. The same issue applies with our rotate X as well, of course, because we're referencing a rotational parameter and not simply the origin expression for that rotation parameter, so we get the exact same issue on rotate X as well. So I'm going to zero out our control, both of our control objects. Let's make sure we are indeed blended back to the attach object. That's going to conclude this video setting up the first part of the script. In the next video we'll deal with that issue that we've got with the rotations and our twist angle in terms of Y, and also our RX for the control RX in terms of rotations in X. But that will conclude this video. Thanks a lot everyone.